Today I'm making cubes. Welcome back. Today I am on another display project. So I'm making these cubey display systems for a client. So the way these are going to work, they're not a perfect cube, but they're kind of more or less a cube. They're 780 high, 790 wide. And there's going to be a display that sits on the top here, and it needs to rebate into the top edges of the MDF. So in other words, there's going to be a board across the top here, and then once that's on, there's going to be a Perspex kind of top that goes on there. That looks terrible. The first challenge is that I want to make this out of 12mm moisture resistant MDF because it's going to get spray painted and it needs to have a really nice finish on it. So 12mm MR MDF should do the job nicely. I don't want to go down the route of 18mm, which is what I would usually use, just because I want to keep the weight of them down a little bit. There's going to be a lot of these to make. They're going to be really heavy if I make them out of 18mm. 12mm just keeps the weight down a little bit. Now, once the thing that's getting displayed on here is put into this top recess, then you have to think, well, how are you going to get that back out? So what I've had to do is put a door on the side here. Then at least you can open it, put your arm in and push the board up so that when you want to take the thing that's getting displayed out, you can do that. And then the other challenge is that there's going to be a Perspex cover over this, and that Perspex cover is going to sit exactly flush. So the Perspex is going to be 790mm wide, but Perspex is going to be 10mm wide Perspex sitting on 12mm wide MDF. Let me show you why that's a problem over on to whiteboard. So I hope you can see this, but if we're looking at the side of the unit, so there's the side, we'll put the door on just to make it obvious which bit we're looking at, and then there's going to be like, oh my god, and then there's going to be a Perspex top, and this has to be perfectly in line with the top of that, otherwise it'll look weird. We don't want like a step. So at this point, if you imagine, let's just cut this whole unit in half. I'm going to massively exaggerate this to make it a bit more obvious what's going on. Here's the inside of the Perspex or acrylic. Here's the inside of the MDF, because this is 10mm and this is 12mm. And what we don't want here is a 2mm gap here. So what I'm going to have to do is route out 2mm of material here and 2mm of material here on the top of the MDF, so that that edge is 10mm and that edge is 10mm, and then it will perfectly match up to the acrylic when it sits on top. Exaggerated, the top's going to look like that. Then the display board will sit in that little gap. I am going to allow a 1mm expansion gap here and here, because what I don't want is a situation where this top board goes in and then it expands slightly and then you literally can't get it back out. So all of the vertical edges need to be mitered. There'll be little feet going on the bottom here just to keep the MDF off the ground. The idea is that this board can be raised or lowered using little spacers under here, and because it depends on what's sitting on top of here, and that will prevent this acrylic from sliding off the top. So the next challenge is to come up with a sensible way of cutting the wood out to minimise waste. And unfortunately on this project there's very few options, because we've got 790, 780 or however it's going to be cut, and no matter what we do, we're going to have a long wasted strip of MDF here. So each unit is going to take 2 sheets of MDF. Now obviously I'll have enough left over that 1 1/3 sheets of MDF per unit effectively. So in terms of my cutting plan, what I could either do is just do one long straight cut down this edge and then do all of my miter cuts down here and down here, or I could do one long miter cut. Well, I would start on this side. I could do one long miter cut down this side and then measure out using the methods that I've shown you before on other videos, measure out to get exactly the correct size on this edge to minimize the number of repeat miter cuts, which are always the biggest problem in projects like this. I think I'm going to do these long cuts here as the miters, and at least then that gets 2 cuts to do 6 miters. And then I'll just have to do the other sheet separately. Nothing I can do about that. Let's crack on and get some wood cut. Right, so that's all of the boards cut. So while I've got the track saw out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the door hole into one of the boards. So here's the first deviation that I've got from the plan I had. What I wanted originally was 100mm frame all the way around, but that's going to create a huge door. And it really doesn't need to be that big. It only needs to be big enough to kind of get your arm in. So I think what I'll do, I like the idea of 100mm on the top and bottom, but I think I'm going to come in 200 on the sides. I'm setting this for 102mm. The reason being is that I'm adding on 2mm for the kerf of the saw, because it's going to be easier to make these cuts having the track on this side of the board. In other words, the cut's going to come down here. If I didn't cater for the kerf, really what I would have to do is do the cut from this side instead, and that's going to be a way more awkward cut to make. So with all of these, I'm going to make sure that the gripping side of the track is on the face of the board. 202mm on the sides. And then I've got some really nice simple cuts to make here. Plunge cuts. And then I'm just going to finish off all of these corners with a little dovetail saw. Just a really light sanding on these corners just to tidy them up. There we go, that's all of the main track saw work out of the road now, so all of the major cutting is done, so the track saw can go away. So come back for part 2, we're going to get the router table out, we're going to get that edge rebate added on, we need to add some internal supports before we then glue and brad nail the whole thing together. Thank you for watching, don't forget to hit subscribe if you're new to the channel, I shall see you next time, bye bye.